welcome and thank you for filling the room for this MPC guest author series event featuring Christopher Moore.
So the next thing I was going to write, I decided I was going to write a book called The Longest Catfish Song, about a blues singer in Clarksdale, Mississippi in the 1930s. Clearly something I had experienced. But my idea was I would write the whole thing in like blues, verse, so that you could, if you went da 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 da, you could read the whole book that way. And it was going to be about these two blues men that were like contemporaries of Muddy Waters and who's the guitar player still alive? The one with the diabetes? B.B. King, yeah. But they were all from that area. And these guys were contemporaries to them, but unlike those guys, they didn't go to Chicago like in the 50s. They just stayed in Clarksdale, Mississippi. But now in their 80s, they were going to go to Chicago and try and make it as bluesmen. But they were going to, this whole backstory that they were going to go through. And one's name was, Smiley, and the problem with him as a bluesman is he was really, really cheerful. So, anyway, so I had to send in, this was now the second book of a contract. I had a contract. My first two books I just wrote because maybe somebody will like this, but now I had a book due. And so I had to send something in advance so they didn't, as we talked about in the workshop earlier today, so they weren't paying me for like a book of my 8th grade poetry, which was awesome. So I thought I'll submit like 3 ideas to them, because Disney had said that. They said, well, you give us 5 ideas and we'll give you 5 ideas and then we'll pick one of yours and you pick one of ours and you write screenplays. And I turned out not doing that, but that's another story. Because they were evil. But they didn't give me a lot of money. But they do make coats out of Dalmatians. That is totally real. So sad. When I sold the book to Disney, I went down to keep a note where I am, Evan. They paid for me to fly down to Los Angeles for my meeting, and I went to the administrative building. So I went to Disney, and I was so lost. I was so lost in Los Angeles. It's a horrible, horrible, horrible place to drive. If you've ever been there, you hate it. And you know what I mean. And so I finally find the studio, and I get to the gate, and I say, they go, oh yes, you're allowed. And I said, I need to get to the administrative building. And I go, how do I get to the administrative building? And the guard goes, well, you just go straight down Mickey and take a right on Goofy. Get the fuck out of here. He's like, no, and this is true. No, you'll see it. It's a building with big pink dwarfs on it. And I'm like, this is an entire corporation that's just put together to fuck with me. At this point, I'm convinced that the entire city of Los Angeles was just built. It's like, he'll be here someday. Like one of those trap horror movies, like Saw. It's like, oh, you'll wander in, but you won't wander out. So I go down Mickey and take a left on Goofy or whichever, and there is this building, and at the top of this building, holding up the thing that's at the top, the Frieda's thing, it encompasses the entire top floor, are 9 like 20-foot pink dwarves. All of them look like Grumpy. Because dwarves really, when they get above 7-8 feet tall, not cute anymore. A little bit intimidating. So, just saying. So where was I? Book. That is not good. Where was I? The blues book. Yeah, the blues book. So the blues book. So, anyway. So I got this great idea. I was going to call it The Longest Catfish Song, and there's a whole thing about catfish in it. And And I sent it in, and then I had done this thing on KR, which is the radio station in Cambria, where I worked for a while when I was doing waiting tables and so forth. And I was a DJ there. Now that's not really that big an impressive achievement, because the way we used to recruit DJs, and this is honest God truth, the station manager would drive up and down Highway 1 and pick up hitchhikers and bring them into the station and teach them how to use the turntables and go, okay, you're on until noon. And then I swear to God. So I was a drive time DJ there. And I, you know, so you kind of got to do anything you wanted, because it wasn't really, they didn't pay or anything. So as long as you were conscious, which wasn't always the case. The sheriff had actually come by because somebody called in and said, you know, K-Honors just got this. And the sheriff went by, and they went into the studio, and somebody passed out their own spew. And there was just like a Zeppelin record going, swear to God. Honest to God truth, so, you know, tough job. But anyway, I used to write these stories, and these really short stories that I would read between songs. And I had written a story about a guy who had a girlfriend. He had a girlfriend he found out was a vampire. And it was all because I read this thing in Science Digest about how they had successfully frozen and thawed vampire bats. You know, because that's evidently a hard thing to do. You know, which I'm thinking, I have not needed to know that. But evidently they keep very well, so if you're stocking up. And so this guy has, you know, this whole thing was like a 4-minute story about this guy who falls in love with this girl, finds out she's a vampire, and doesn't know what to do, because now he's terrified of her, so he puts her like in the freezer, in a chest freezer, you know, like, and she's got like tater tots on top of her. And that was the whole story. It was just like that one gig of being able to say, yes, I tucked some TV dinners under her arms, and I'll figure out, and it was da-da. So I put that down as one of my ideas, because I'm like, you know, and at the end of it, it's like, you probably wouldn't want to do this. You know, and I don't remember what the other idea was, and then I had the Longest Catfish song. And my editor, who was a guy named Michael Corda, who was like a big-time editor, he was running Simon & Schuster at the time, he calls me, he goes, oh, Chris, we want you to do the vampire book. And I'm like, oh. Anne Rice has sort of done the whole alternative vampire history thing. And he goes, are her books funny? And I go, well, no. And he goes, well, there you go. And that's how big time decisions get made in public. So I wrote Bloodsucking Fiends, a love story, based entirely on that 3-minute radio story that I had written. And I set it in San Francisco, and I came up and stayed at the Van Ness Motel, which, strangely enough, is on Van Ness Boulevard. And I was terrified of cities. I'd never spent any time in cities my whole life. I grew up in sort of industrial town, Ohio, a small town. And so I drove up, parked my car at the motel, and then I learned to use the number 41 bus, which doesn't exist anymore, but it goes up, went up Van Ness, down Market, kind of meandered through North Beach, went down to the Embarcadero, and then came back up Van Ness. So that entire book, for those of you who are this kind of fact checker, is set within 1 block of the number 41 bus. If I'd be like in the Tenderloin, I'd be getting a little freaked out because it was, you know, starting to get dark. I'd be like, choo, on the 41 bus. Just sit long enough and I'll be home. A lot of that book takes place on a bus, for some reason. So I wrote that book, and then I was sort of, I don't know anything. What am I going to write about? And I, somewhere along there, had learned how to scuba dive, got certified to scuba dive. I thought, man, I would like to do, they used to talk about, there was a guy that used to come into the restaurant when I worked in the pasta factory, who would talk about going to Micronesia. And there were 2 things I knew about Micronesia. The Laguna truck had 61 Japanese ships at the bottom of the lagoon that were in fairly shallow water. And when the Korean construction company, who were hired by the Americans to build roads on truck, showed up, their name on the sides of the trucks, translated into truckies, meant huge penis. So whenever the construction guys would drive by somebody on truck, all the natives would be like, so I was like, I want to go to that place. And I tried to figure out what kind of story I could write about an island where I could go to the truck and scuba dive shipwrecks and make fun of the natives. And when I was an anthro major for my semester at Ohio State, and so the coolest thing, my approach to research is always not how much do you need to know, how much detail, is what's cool. You know, that's what I want to come away from it, that's what I want to tell you guys. The coolest thing about natives was cargo cults. Do you guys know what that is?
Yes.
Yeah, in World War II, they used to send these flying boat pilots into the Pacific, the American Navy did. And they would land on these islands where nobody had been for years, and they go, hi, we're the Americans, here's some chocolate, a machete, some chewing gum, some matches. You're our friends. We'll be back. Here's some cool stuff. If you give a machete to someone in a Stone Age culture, you have significantly changed their life. So, like in the 1950s, they went back to some of these islands that had never been touched by, mostly in Melanesia, down near what's now called the New Hebrides. They went, Vanuatu, I guess. They went back to these islands that hadn't had any contact from the outside, and they're still waiting for those guys to come back. And there's whole religions built up around one pilot. This is a true thing. And they were like, yeah, he's going to be back any minute. And the thing is about islanders is islanders don't have so much as creative or creation myths like other cultures. All their stuff came from somewhere else, because in the beginning, regardless of where you live, you either came from somewhere in Asia or somewhere in the Americas or somewhere in Australia and migrated. So all your myths go to the ancestors brought it, something came from somewhere else. And so these guys were going to come back. In Melanesia, there's a cult called the John Frum cult. And they still exist as an active religion. And they march around with like rifles that are red and white uniforms, waiting for John Frum to come from the volcano to bring stuff back. And anthropologists went in and said, why the red and white? They're not real rifles, they're made out of like bamboo. They go, why the red and white rifles? And he goes, well, because John Frum's brother wears red and white. And they're like, oh, no, Santa Claus. But John Frum flies an airplane because we don't have snow, so he can't bring a sleigh. And they're like, oh, no, and you think, well, stupid natives. But then you kind of have to look at, okay, there was this talking snake. Just saying. Everybody's, a myth is just a religion you don't believe in. So I wrote about that. I wrote Island of the Sequin Love Nun, about a group of these cargo cult islanders who worship the World War II bomber pilot, and the World War II bomber pilot's ghost gets involved. He feels some responsibility because he lied. And so he sort of makes a story happen. Let's see what happened after that. Oh yeah, so then I used up more time writing Island of the Sequin Love Nun, and I still didn't really know anything. And I had a book due, and I didn't have time to do any research, go anywhere on a big trip or anything. So I thought, well, I'll just have to set it here in Canberra again, in Pine Cove, and it was the first one.